common to everyone. No one gets out of this life without experiencing some form of shame or another. And the movement to create such a service came out of my spiritual direction experience. Over the last year, I have worked with a number of women who have raised this as an issue and struggled with what to do with those concerns. The first story that was read from the Old Testament focuses on Joseph and his brothers. A familiar story, but one that probably, at least I've not heard addressed from this perspective. Joseph is 17 years of age. His story is found, if you wish to read the whole story, in Genesis 37 through 50. But as a 17-year-old shepherd, he's greatly concerned to please his father, Jacob. He becomes sort of this tattletale kind of boy. He's gone out to investigate what's going on with the shepherding of the sheep from his other brothers, and he brings back an ill report, and obviously does not win the endearment of his brothers at that point. This behavior, this tattletaling business, combined with Jacob, his father's overt favoritism, was begrudging the brothers, begrudging these other sons. And when Jacob presented Joseph with his highly beautiful, attractive robe, that seemed to just incense them with more hatred and anger. To make matters worse, this young Joseph gets all excited about his dreams and begins to sit down with brothers and eventually with father and to share with them what is, from his point, to be called prophetic visions of his future. That's sort of rubbing salt in the wounds for his brothers. And this animosity grows, and Joseph peaks in the experience when they plot to kill him, as read in the text today. You've also noted in the text that Reuben, the eldest, objects to his murder, and he's eventually sold into slavery and sold into Potiphar's house and sold into an experience eventually that leads him to be disgraced by Potiphar's wife, who propositions him over and over and over again. But when the famine strikes that Joseph has prophesied, it strikes Canaan as well. Jacob and his sons are sitting around, and Jacob finally looks at them and says, "Get up and go to Egypt and bring us food so that we can survive." It's in the experience of the movement from wanting to kill him to selling him and to now coming to Egypt, and they meet their long-lost brother, but as the result of their actions, as a result of the shame of their deeds, they no longer are able to recognize him. Joseph's brothers does exactly as the dream indicated. They bow down to him. And Joseph, after testing and trying his brothers, eventually comes to the place where he eventually reveals his identity, and importantly for Joseph, forgives their wrongdoing. Jacob, his father, is eventually invited to come to Egypt, and Jacob's descendants stay in Egypt for 400 years until the time of Moses. So much of this story has positive movement in it, other than the journey of these brothers. The story gets us in touch with guilt and shame over a lifetime. Note the brothers' process that nurtures this experience in their hearts. There's a growing animosity and anger over the years with this unusual son. He would say, "I'm sure I'm just sharing my responsibility, the task that was given. Thus I reported the data to my father. The dreams were so exciting and so wonderful, I couldn't keep them from you." But as the result of the shame experiences of the brothers, and unlike guilt is the result of something that I have chosen to do wrong. Shame concludes on the basis that what I've done, there's something wrong with me. And you see that shame quality living out in the brothers' life. They not only try to kill Joseph, but they then go to the next level of attempting to deceive their father, and are successful in doing that. The selling of Joseph is done. They're brought to Egypt. Joseph reveals himself, and shame surfaces its improbable head again relative to the intentions of Joseph as perceived by his brothers. Even at table together, their fear reflects their shame. He's going to do something of retribution. He's going to pay us back for something that we've done. Again, as the journey continues to unfold, another deceptive tool is experienced by the brothers as the father, Jacob, dies. They conjure up this tale that before his death, he wanted to make sure that they heard that he had hoped that Joseph would be free to go and forgive them and not follow through with retribution. They come back and share that with Joseph. You see Joseph's immediate reaction to their struggle. The story tells us that he steps aside and weeps. And my sense of his weeping is because the choices, the shame, the guilt, the anger that his brothers have been feeling have blocked their ability to see his compassion and his love for them. The second story brings us to the woman caught in adultery. Note the violence coming from the scribes and Pharisees. The law of Moses says we're to stone her. Nothing is said about the male, interestingly enough. It seems that they sort of get off of the hook from their responsibility. But when you look into the culture of the times, you see that in the Middle East, the culture was a culture of secrecy. Secrecy is always linked to shame, men and women. The culture weighed matters between honor and shame. Honor, most of the time, related to men fulfilling their male responsibilities. Women, most often, sort of were expected to get caught up in some form of shame. Shame was so powerful in the rabbinic tradition that even powerful atrocities must be buried. The experience of this woman happens in a culture clearly where there are no civil or human rights for women, thus connecting women to violence. But the core issue here, along with the violence against women, is men's immunity for their sin. With open eyes, men can do whatever they please, it seems, and get away with it. For men in Judaism, the act of adultery was not punishable by imprisonment, but you notice in the text, they were about ready to stone this woman for getting caught in the same thing that he was. What we see is that from the Old Testament, individuals stuck in guilt and shame cannot hear mercy, cannot hear forgiveness, and the grace being offered to them. The human struggle, the emotional struggle, the spiritual struggle to move within the context of our prayer life as good Episcopalians is blocked at times by this struggle of those deep, torn emotions in our lives. It was more than one action for the Old Testament brothers, but many decisions the brothers chose to create, to enhance what evolved as toxic shame, to have a place to abide and to grow in their hearts. Shame is built by deception, lies, unresolved anger, and more deception, inability to face their condition of unrelenting shame. Now, in contemporary work, what you find is that our deception, our lies, our unresolved anger, our own ongoing sense of self-deception is where this problem emerges and grows. The Hebrew culture of shame is more profound than just embarrassment. Shame in rabbinic studies is an extraordinary awareness of the brokenness of who I am. It's an interruption or rupture of self-consciousness. The fear of radical exposure. The fear of being uncovered, raw and vulnerable. The automatic response to shame experience historically is to move into the darkness, to hide, to not be able to face what has occurred in my life. The rabbinic teaching on embarrassment and shame is awfully powerful. To intentionally harm another with shameful acts, as they did to Joseph, as they did to this woman, is believed in the Hebrew studies to be tantamount to murder. The person causing the shame to another must forfeit their position in the world to come. This is how serious the Old Testament saw the issue of shame. But remember, guilt is something that I did, thus justifying its presence, drawing me to confession, drawing me to restitution. Shame experiences often end up concluding shame results in something that is wrong with me. The old guidance from rabbinic studies indicates that shame was an experience different than guilt that needed to be experienced, almost a sense of setting with it very openly with your community, acknowledging that some horrible event had occurred in your life. But the rabbis were very clear, and I thought most interesting in light of the contrast of the women that I'm going to talk to you about in my spiritual direction practice. The rabbi said that shame ought to be something that you ought to deal with in 30 days and get beyond it. What they were saying was that hiding and covering it up and ignoring it in one's life is not healthy or productive. Let me bring you into the present with a couple of the ladies that I've worked with over the last year. And I will quote what they said as they began their work. I've been seeing this woman from Lebanon for about 9 months now. And this is the story that emerged from one of our spiritual direction sessions. And I quote her. I was about 17 years of age. I'd come home from school and brought my report card with me. All my family was in the living room, and they were talking and laughing. When I entered, my father saw that I had my report card, and he asked that I bring it to him. And I obediently handed my report card to him, and he opened it. And I saw the disappointment in his face. My father stood up, slapped me in the face, and said, "Do not ever bring a C grade home in math again." This woman felt humiliated, felt shamed by her father in the presence of her family. And that this issue created a guilt-shame experience that now, almost 25 years later, is still shaping her life experience. And that was the motivation to come into spiritual direction. I need help moving from shame to shame resilience. Another person comes to see me. She's about 45 years of age. The other, first lady from Lebanon, was about 38. The second woman came because there was much trouble in her life. She was having difficulty in her marriage. She reported the fact immediately and wanted to discuss it, about the impact of sexual abuse as a young child, and then abuse later by teenagers in her life. And she felt clearly that those things contributed from her side to the problems in the marriage. But this is what she said: "I feel so ashamed. My self-esteem is low, and I do not know what to do." And then the telling phrase was this. She said, "Al, I feel like I'm standing by a river, dying of thirst." What a powerful statement, I believe. My task as a spiritual director is to gently, lovingly pull apart the strands never minimizing the pain as she attempts to move from shame to shame resilience and exploring what spiritual practices will assist in that journey. Shame is a reality for men as well as women. What I've learned over the years with men is that we choose to manifest either a hot temper or withdrawal. And we call it just frustration in relationship. But often as I've dug around those roots, I find that they too have experienced a shame experience. Women react with, I'm not good enough. I'm not a good enough wife. I'm not a good enough lover. I'm not a good enough teacher. I'm not a good enough lover. Just many aspects of my life that I'm not good enough in. Shame is hard work to talk about for us. So, from a man's standpoint, I don't talk about humiliation now. I don't talk about the experiences where I've been put down. I would rather just stuff those things in my life. But women may never want to talk about shame, but they'll openly talk about their struggle with perfectionism. What we don't understand, I don't think, is that perfectionism is a stepchild of shame. Shame fed by religious leaders as they told their part of the story, dragging her in. Look at what she's done, Jesus. What do you say we should do with her? We know what the law says. Stone her to death. It's interesting, I paid close attention to Michael's reading of the New Testament text. He mentioned twice that Jesus bends down and writes in the sand. Some have felt that what he's doing is writing the sins of the man. And they find themselves caught in an embarrassing situation, obviously, recognizing that he knows more about them than they thought he did. But it's in that bending down and writing the sins of these men in the sand that he eventually turns and looks to this woman and says, in essence, I know you have had a horrible experience. My heart and prayer would that this would have never happened to you. But nobody's around here accusing you. I'm not going to condemn you. She walks away with guidance about her actions, with no condemnation. Some of the spiritual practices that the women who have come had to deal with just briefly. Then we'll open it for some questions if you wish. In order to move from shame to shame resilience, it requires a journey toward authenticity. But that journey toward authenticity requires that we let go of what people think. Critical dynamic and connection between those two. The second obvious quality of spiritual support comes in cultivating self-compassion. That in order to have self-compassion, we have to let go of our perfectionism. We also have to cultivate intuition and a trusting faith, letting go of our need for certainty. Another one of the spiritual practices looked at truthfulness, letting go of denial and the subtle ways we shade our self-narratives. The last one to mention briefly is equanimity, letting go of fear, preference, and the need to dramatize my ordinary story. I'm just wondering, do you have any questions that you would like to ask? Anything that comes to your mind out of your experience with others, or maybe your journey from shame to shame resilience in your own life?
It's interesting that in my life coach work, you often hear me talk about feminine males and masculine females.
Yes.
Feminine males definitely carry shame,
Yes.
particularly if it's come from their mother.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
And it's something that not everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for your note. Yes.
Have you ever encountered somebody that spends way too much time trying to impress others, and why do they do that? I mean, I see people in church, I see myself, I'm going to be 60 this summer,
Yeah.
And I just feel like, it's just been the last couple of years where I've actually looked at myself and said, well, why am I doing that? I mean, am I really trying to just impress somebody? And why would I do that? So now I'm not too impressed at all, but I'm sure that has something to do with, when you're trying to gain something out of that, that probably starts with some kind of, I'm not good enough experience. I don't know, what have you seen?
In my own life and in the work that I've done, what I've discovered is this. That shame manifests itself and guilt manifests, unresolved guilt manifests itself in many ways. The dynamic that is clear in both of these women that I've worked with is that I do not feel grounded, I do not feel self-confident, I do not feel affirmed, I do not feel blessed. So that when you come into the community of faith, you'll do about anything you need to do to get that approval. The danger with that kind of process, when you're attempting to do spiritual direction, is that that has a flavor of escapism. And what we need to begin to look for are ways that the faith community can begin to move more honestly so that people can feel comfortable to share more deeply the struggles and hurts of their own lives. More so than ever, probably, in my limited opinion, in light of the 21st century, we need places where we can be honest and affirming and loving and caring with each other. Genuine, yes.
Adultery is not such a big thing in our current society.
No.
I wonder who some of the women are today that are being stoned.
A good question. Pardon me?
Careful.
Politically, I think women are being stoned in many, many respects. But more importantly, I think in this culture, what I see is that women who are abused, who don't fit into the culture as the culture would like them to, they get pushed aside. I believe they get stoned in some respect. What happens to men?
No, I said, so why? Because it's not that obvious when it's happening to men.
Well, we've learned the masterful art of stuffing a lot of things.
Absolutely. Which is why it was so negative in Jack.
Oh, yes. Yes, sir.
Well, when it happened to me in my life, I went to the priest for advice. And I guess it took me 2 weeks to figure out what's going on. And his advice was get 2 lawyers and get divorced.
Yeah.
That worked.
Yeah. Well, my personal route into change is something that I can share with you at this point. I was 8 years of age when the pastor of the congregation I was attending sexually molested me as a child. A critical event in my life. It took a long time for me. I attempted to share that with my family, and they, he could never do anything like that. This must be a lie. A lot of dynamics centered around that in my life until I chose to intentionally enter the journey of silence and contemplative life. I can tell you from years of observation in many, many contexts in hospital as well as in spiritual direction, if you're struggling with these kind of issues, entering into the stillness of God is very, very important to discover the movement toward healing and wholeness. That's something that is not encouraged much in our culture today. We're very much more into noise and confusion and chaos. But if you find yourself carrying some of this stuff, my encouragement would be to enter into a spiritual direction relationship with someone around the Inland Empire, and there are many people who are doing that. But more importantly, that you begin the contemplative journey, because in that context, whatever baggage you're carrying is going to surface, and the Holy Spirit is going to enable you to know more clearly how to offer that up as your gift to God. Quite a different approach than our usual approach of gifting, but an important piece to bring whatever the baggage is. I did have opportunity, and it wasn't of my doing, but I felt compelled to respond. I was in an associate relationship, and my former district supervisor called me and he said, could I come by and talk to you? I want to discuss this man who wants to come back to the old district. And I said, well, I have some things that probably you need to know about that are painful and hurtful, but if you wish to proceed, come ahead. And this man, who would be comparable to your bishop, sat in my office in the church where I was serving at the time. And he said, what do you know? And I shared the experience with him. And he was able to then follow through with the appropriate discipline and the appropriate action to deal with that pastor's response, who never expressed any sorrow or never asked for forgiveness. So sometimes life gives you a gift in disguise. Many people that I work with never find the gift of responding back. Bottom line, I think the journey is a call toward empowerment of voice, particularly for women, empowerment of honesty as it relates to men who need to talk about what they have repulsed and shut down, closed in their own life. In the name of the Father, and of the Son,